February 20th, 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The needle on the fuel gauge hovered near empty as Colonel Hans Georg Hildebrandt's command vehicle crested the ridge overlooking the abandoned American supply depot. The commander of the 21st Panzer Division lowered his field glasses twice, certain the morning sun was creating mirages across the desert floor. Das ist unmöglich. This cannot be real. Spread before him lay row after row of fuel drums, stacked methodically in the American fashion, glinting like treasure in the North African dawn. Hildebrandt's division had been operating on fumes, carefully rationing their last reserves of fuel, when they stumbled upon what the retreating US Second Corps had abandoned in their flight through Kasserine Pass. The depot contained 57,000 gallons of fuel, more gasoline than his entire division typically received from Germany in 2 months. Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, intelligence officer of the Afrika Korps, would later record in his memoirs, "We found more petrol in one American dump than most German divisions had seen since El Alamein. The Americans fled and left enough fuel to operate our entire army for days. What kind of enemy possesses such abundance that they can afford to abandon it?" This moment at Kasserine Pass revealed a truth more devastating than any battlefield defeat. The Americans possessed material wealth so vast that their abandoned supplies exceeded what the Wehrmacht could manage to deliver across the Mediterranean. The 10th and 21st Panzer Divisions had just achieved Germany's greatest tactical victory against American forces in North Africa, capturing materials that temporarily transformed their operational capacity. Yet within that triumph lay mathematical proof of inevitable defeat. The equations of modern warfare were being written not in tactics or courage, but in fuel consumption versus fuel delivered. And those numbers told a story that no amount of German battlefield excellence could overcome. By February 1943, the Afrika Korps had mastered desert warfare through 2 years of campaigns that had made them legendary. Under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's leadership, they had driven the British back to Egypt, earned Montgomery's respect, and turned the North African theatre into a showcase of German tactical superiority. Yet every victory now came measured against an increasingly desperate calculation: fuel required versus fuel available. Wehrmacht logistics records from late 1942 revealed the crisis in unforgiving detail. The German-Italian forces in North Africa required 32,250 tons of supplies monthly for their 65,000 men, with fuel alone accounting for 17,500 tons, 54% of all requirements. But Mediterranean convoys faced devastating interdiction. Malta-based aircraft and submarines were sinking 60 to 70% of Axis supply ships by early 1943. What reached African ports then faced a 1,500-kilometre journey to the front, consuming more fuel than it delivered. The desert's appetite for fuel exceeded all European calculations. A single Panzer Division required 350 tons of supplies daily during combat operations. Moving 1 ton of supplies to forward positions consumed 5 tons of fuel in transport alone. Tank crews had become experts at fuel conservation techniques that would have seemed absurd in Poland or France. Coasting down slopes with engines off, push-starting vehicles to save batteries, and siphoning fuel from damaged vehicles with religious dedication. Rommel himself had admitted in January 1943, "Our operations are decided more by the petrol gauge than by tactical requirements." This wasn't hyperbole, it was mathematical reality. The Afrika Korps had only 3 days of fuel remaining at El Alamein when Montgomery attacked. By February, despite being closer to supply ports, the situation had worsened. Dawn, February 14, 1943. Field Marshal Rommel and General Hans Georg von Arnim launched their coordinated offensive against American forces holding positions in central Tunisia. Operation Frühlingswind, Spring Wind, sent General Friedrich von Broich's 10th Panzer Division and Colonel Hildebrandt's 21st Panzer through the Faid Pass towards Sidi Bou Zid. This represented the Afrika Korps' last concentrated armour assault, a desperate attempt to disrupt Allied preparations before material superiority became overwhelming. The attack achieved complete tactical surprise. More than 100 German tanks and assault guns, supported by mechanized infantry, smashed into positions held by the U.S. 1st Armored Division's Combat Command A. The Americans, deployed in isolated positions across hilltops, couldn't provide mutual support. Their M3 Grant and Lee tanks, with high silhouettes and hull-mounted main guns, proved catastrophically vulnerable to German combined arms tactics perfected over 3 years of war. Lieutenant Colonel John Waters, commanding the 1st Battalion, 1st Armoured Regiment, lost 44 of 51 tanks in the opening engagement at Sidi Bou Zid. The destruction was systematic. German veterans executed textbook manoeuvres, while American crews, many in combat for the first time, charged piecemeal into concentrated fire. Yet even in victory, fuel dominated German thinking. Panzer IV companies had to abandon operational vehicles simply because their tanks ran dry. The irony was bitter, destroying enemy forces they couldn't pursue, winning battles they couldn't exploit, all because the fuel gauge read empty. February 17, 1943. As American forces retreated toward Kasserine Pass, they abandoned supply depots established according to U.S. Army doctrine that seemed fantastical to German quartermasters. American planning called for one depot every 50 to 100 miles, each containing redundant supplies sufficient to maintain operations even if others were lost. German forces, who measured fuel by the litre and counted every artillery round, encountered abundance beyond their comprehension. A reconnaissance patrol from the 21st Panzer Division discovered the first major depot near Station de Sened. The patrol leader's report, preserved in Wehrmacht archives, provides insight into German shock. The depot covered approximately 10 hectares. Fuel drums were stacked in perfect rows, over 400 drums of 55 gallons each. There were rations for what must have been an entire regiment for a month. White bread, still fresh, canned meat, real coffee, chocolate, cigarettes by the 1,000 cartons. Medical supplies we haven't seen since 1941. German troops who had subsisted on Italian hardtack and ersatz coffee made from acorns fell upon American rations with the desperation of starving men. The chocolate alone exceeded what German civilians received in monthly rations. But it was the fuel that mattered most. Within hours, vehicles designated as non-operational due to empty tanks were suddenly mobile again. February 19th to 20th, 1943. As German forces pushed through the 2-mile-wide Kasserine Pass, they overran the main American supply infrastructure supporting Second Corps operations. What they discovered exceeded their wildest expectations and their darkest fears. The battle's material results were staggering. German forces captured 183 tanks, 104 half-tracks, 208 artillery pieces, 512 trucks and motor vehicles, along with 215 cubic metres, 57,000 gallons, of gasoline and lubricants and 45 tons of ammunition. To put this in perspective, the fuel alone represented nearly a week's supply for the entire Afrika Korps, more than many German divisions had received in the previous quarter. Rommel himself inspected the captured depots on February 21st. His aide-de-camp, Hauptmann Heinz Werner Schmidt, recorded the field marshal's reaction. Rommel stood silent for a long moment, surveying the mountains of supplies. Then he said quietly, "Each American battalion is supplied better than our entire divisions. What kind of victory is it when the enemy can afford to lose more than we can afford to use?" The captured American vehicles proved even more valuable than fuel in the short term. Wehrmacht records indicate that by February 1943, 85% of Rommel's transport consisted of captured British and American vehicles. The American 2.5-ton trucks, which German troops called Jimmies, were particularly prized, more reliable than German Opel Blitz trucks, easier to maintain, and abandoned with spare parts that German forces hadn't seen in years. The captured supplies revealed more than material wealth. They exposed fundamentally different approaches to warfare. American military doctrine, as Germans discovered through captured field manuals, assumed massive oversupply as insurance. Where German divisions operated on 200 tons of supplies daily, American divisions were allocated 700 tons, a difference that reflected not just wealth but an entirely different conception of war. Interrogation of captured Americans provided further shock. Captain William Baker of the 1st Armoured Division claimed his battalion normally received 100% of requested supplies, plus a 25% reserve margin. When German intelligence officers suggested this was propaganda, Baker laughed and said that was considered the minimum acceptable level. Captured requisition forms confirmed allocations that exceeded entire German monthly deliveries. General Friedrich von Broich, commanding the 10th Panzer Division, wrote in his after-action report, "The enemy operates on principles foreign to our experience. They assume waste, plan for excess, and consider redundancy essential. This is not an army in the European sense, it is an industrial process that happens to involve combat." The German success at Kasserine created a paradox that even junior officers recognized. The captured supplies temporarily resolved immediate shortages, enabling operations otherwise impossible. Yet the sheer abundance revealed the mathematical impossibility of ultimate victory. The psychological impact on German troops was profound. They discovered medical supplies, including penicillin, a miracle drug unavailable even in German military hospitals. They found chocolate and coffee as standard rations, while their families in Germany subsisted on turnips and ersatz substitutes. Most demoralizing were the captured documents showing these materials would be replaced within weeks. Shipping manifests indicated this was merely one of dozens of similar depots. A junior officer of the 10th Panzer Division wrote home, in a letter that survived in family archives, "We feast on American rations while our families starve. We burn American fuel while our homeland suffers shortages. We have won a battle by capturing what our enemies throw away. This is not victory, it is scavenging." Field Marshal Rommel underwent a complete transformation in his assessment of American forces after Kasserine. Initially dismissive, calling them poorly trained and equipped with inferior doctrine, Rommel recognized, after seeing their material resources, that tactical skill mattered less than industrial capacity. In his February 22 report to OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, partially quoted in post-war histories, Rommel wrote, "The Americans are militarily inexperienced but materially overwhelming. They learn from mistakes we cannot afford to make. Time favours them absolutely. Each day they grow stronger while we grow weaker, regardless of tactical outcomes." His final assessment proved prophetic. We can win battles, but not the war. The Americans bring to the battlefield not superior tactics, but superior arithmetic. They win through multiplication of supplies, equipment, attempts. We are fighting the entire industrial output of America. Following Kasserine, the Afrika Korps operated increasingly on captured supplies. This dependency created an operational death spiral. Every advance required capturing enemy supplies, transforming tactical planning into desperate scavenging expeditions. By March 1943, Wehrmacht records showed bizarre equipment mixtures. German crews operating captured Sherman tanks marked with Wehrmacht crosses, artillery units firing American 105mm howitzers, transport companies running entirely on captured vehicles. The proud Afrika Korps had transformed into what one veteran later called a parasitic army living off enemy excess. The dependency reached absurd levels. German workshops used American tools and spare parts. Medical units relied entirely on captured American supplies. Even staff vehicles ran on American fuel, as German allocations prioritized combat vehicles that increasingly didn't exist. The captured documents at Kasserine provided German intelligence with their first accurate assessment of American production. What they discovered defied comprehension. A single captured report from the Detroit Tank Arsenal showed production of 1,350 M4 Sherman tanks in January 1943 alone, exceeding total German tank production for the quarter. More devastating were production trajectories. American output was increasing monthly, while German production declined due to bombing and resource shortages. The mathematics were simple and merciless. America produced 4,000 aircraft monthly, Germany 2,000. America produced 4,000 tanks monthly, Germany 500. America produced 50,000 vehicles monthly, Germany 5,000. Major Hermann Kohl, an industrial engineer with the Afrika Korps, analysed the captured documents and concluded in a report that was suppressed. "We are not fighting an army. We are fighting an entire continent's industrial output. The outcome is determined by production statistics, not battlefield courage." Beyond material mathematics lay human equations equally impossible. The Afrika Korps was losing irreplaceable veterans, while Americans arrived with fresh training and unlimited equipment. Each destroyed German tank meant a crew lost that took years to train. Each American loss was replaced within weeks. An intercepted American communication revealed they were shipping replacement crews at a rate of 5,000 monthly to North Africa. The Afrika Korps hadn't received 5,000 replacements total since El Alamein. The mathematics of attrition were as merciless as those of supply. The variety of captured equipment created a maintenance nightmare that accelerated German defeat. American vehicles required parts German workshops couldn't manufacture. Captured tanks needed specialized tools German crews didn't possess. The abundance of captured equipment became a burden as mechanical attrition destroyed what combat hadn't. By April 1943, abandoned American vehicles littered German positions, not destroyed in battle but immobilized by lack of maintenance. The Afrika Korps had captured more than it could sustain, a metaphor for their entire North African campaign. General von Arnim, who assumed command in Tunisia after Rommel's departure due to illness, inherited an impossible situation. His forces operated primarily on captured materials they couldn't replace, dependent on supply lines that delivered almost nothing while consuming precious fuel. His chief of staff's assessment was blunt. "We are fighting with borrowed time and stolen supplies against an enemy with unlimited both. Mathematics, not tactics, determines the outcome. We can win every battle and still lose through arithmetic alone." As German forces retreated into an ever-shrinking perimeter around Tunis and Bizerte, the dependency on captured supplies became complete. Units operated entirely on seized American materials, creating the surreal situation of the Wehrmacht, fighting with American equipment against American forces. The final German staff estimate from April 1943 revealed the impossible mathematics. They needed 7,500 tons of supplies monthly for defensive operations. They were receiving less than 1,000 tons. American forces were receiving 15,000 tons daily. The ratio of supply superiority exceeded 450 to 1. On May 13, 1943, the Afrika Korps surrendered along with all remaining Axis forces in North Africa. Over 275,000 German and Italian troops became prisoners. They surrendered not to superior generals or braver soldiers, but to the inexorable mathematics of industrial warfare. Decades later, surviving Afrika Korps veterans would gather for reunions where they reflected on Kasserine's meaning. Their testimonies, recorded by historians, provide the final assessment of what the captured supplies truly meant. Friedrich Schulz, who commanded a panzer company, said in 1985, "We thought we won at Kasserine because we captured the pass and the supplies. We actually lost because those supplies showed us the war was already over. When your greatest victory involves seizing what your enemy abandons, you are not winning. You are delaying defeat." Wilhelm Hoffmann, a supply officer with the 21st Panzer, reflected in 1990. The American fuel we captured meant everything tactically and nothing strategically. It enabled us to continue operations for a few more weeks, but it also showed that our enemies measured fuel in shiploads while we measured it in drums. We were fighting against infinity with finite resources. The significance of Kasserine Pass lay not in the tactical manoeuvres historians debate, but in the simple mathematics revealed by the captured supplies. German monthly fuel allocation, 12,000 gallons when delivered. American fuel captured at Kasserine, 57,000 gallons. American monthly fuel shipments to North Africa, 15 million gallons. Time for America to replace Kasserine losses, 2 weeks. Time for Germany to accumulate equivalent supplies, 6 months, if uninterrupted. These numbers told a story that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. The Afrika Korps achieved its greatest tactical victory at the precise moment it discovered strategic defeat was inevitable. For Americans, Kasserine Pass was a painful lesson in combat that led to rapid improvement. They replaced ineffective commanders, improved tactics, and better coordinated their overwhelming material advantages. Within weeks, they had transformed defeat into educational opportunity. For Germans, Kasserine was a revelation of impossibility. They had won tactically while discovering they had already lost strategically. The supplies they captured, those 57,000 gallons of fuel, those 183 tanks, those mountains of food and ammunition, provided temporary relief while proving ultimate defeat was mathematical certainty. Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, who served as intelligence officer throughout the campaign, wrote in his post-war memoir, Panzer Battles. At Kasserine, we learned that the Americans could afford to lose a battle. We could not afford to win one. They replaced their losses in weeks. We couldn't replace our victories. This was not war as we understood it. It was industrial mathematics in uniform. The deeper truth revealed at Kasserine was that World War II had become a contest of industrial capacity rather than military skill. The Wehrmacht, shaped by European campaigns where operational art could overcome material disadvantage, discovered in North Africa that industrial output determined outcomes more than tactical brilliance. The captured American supplies indicated a production system operating on principles that German planners hadn't imagined. Where Germany sought efficiency, America pursued redundancy. Where Germany conserved, America assumed waste. Where Germany calculated minimum requirements, America multiplied everything by factors that seemed insane to scarcity-minded Germans. An American logistics manual captured at Kasserine specified ammunition expenditures that exceeded entire German campaign allocations. Artillery units were authorized to fire suppressive barrages using more shells than German units received for targeted engagement. The profligacy seemed criminal to German officers who hoarded every round. The impact on German morale proved more damaging than material losses. Soldiers who had believed in German technical superiority discovered American equipment that was not just abundant, but often superior. The Sherman tank, initially mocked by German crews, proved more reliable than German Panthers. American radios worked better than German communications equipment. American rations surpassed anything German soldiers had eaten since before the war. Letters home, those that survived censorship and bombing, revealed the depth of demoralization. Soldiers wrote of American chocolate bars that exceeded German children's Christmas presents. They described medical supplies that could have saved German wounded who died for want of basic medicines. They mentioned fuel wastage that exceeded German allocations. The propaganda ministry eventually stopped trying to explain North African operations positively. Goebbels himself noted that soldiers who had seen American abundance couldn't be convinced Germany was winning through propaganda alone. As the final perimeter shrank around Tunis in early May 1943, German forces made a last accounting of their situation. They were operating almost entirely on captured equipment, burning captured fuel, firing captured ammunition. The Afrika Korps that had entered Africa as the Wehrmacht's elite had become completely dependent on enemy largesse. The surrender on May 13, 1943, was almost anticlimactic. German forces had run out of fuel, ammunition, food, and hope. They surrendered to an enemy who could afford to be generous in victory because victory had been assured by industrial production long before the last shot was fired. General Hans Kramer, last commander of the Afrika Korps, stated simply, "We were defeated by superior materiel." But this understated the reality. They were defeated by a system that could afford to lose what Germany couldn't afford to win, that could waste what Germany couldn't acquire, that could replace in days what Germany couldn't produce in months. The Battle of Kasserine Pass entered American military history as a defeat that taught valuable lessons about combat readiness and tactical coordination. Within weeks, the US Army had reformed, bringing in new commanders like George Patton and implementing hard-learned lessons about concentration of force and combined arms operations. But for the Germans who won the battle, Kasserine represented something far more profound, the moment when tactical victory revealed strategic impossibility. The supplies they captured provided temporary operational capability, while proving that long-term victory was mathematically impossible. Veterans who survived captivity and returned to Germany after the war would often reflect on Kasserine as the moment they understood Germany would lose. Not because of the tactical situation, which remained favourable, but because of the industrial arithmetic revealed by those captured supplies. In 2003, on the 60th anniversary of Kasserine Pass, the last surviving German officer from the battle, a former lieutenant who wished to remain anonymous, provided this assessment. "We captured enough fuel to operate for days, enough food to feast for weeks, enough ammunition to fight battles. But we also captured understanding. The Americans could lose such quantities without concern. We couldn't acquire such quantities with our greatest efforts. We were fighting against mathematical certainty disguised as military operations. Those 57,000 gallons of fuel we seized were simultaneously our salvation and our doom. Salvation because they enabled continued resistance. Doom because they proved resistance was futile. We had glimpsed American industrial power, and we knew that no amount of German courage could defeat American arithmetic. Kasserine taught the Americans how to fight. It taught us that we had already lost. Both lessons were true, but ours was final. The Afrika Korps' capture of American supply dumps at Kasserine Pass in February 1943 represented the last significant German tactical victory in North Africa. The 57,000 gallons of fuel, 183 tanks, 512 vehicles, and tons of supplies they seized enabled temporary continuation of operations that would have been otherwise impossible. Yet within this tactical triumph lay strategic catastrophe. The captured supplies revealed an industrial disparity so vast that no amount of operational skill could overcome it. German forces had discovered they were fighting not the United States Army, but the United States itself, its factories, its farms, its infinite capacity for production and replacement. The mathematics were merciless. While German forces celebrated capturing 57,000 gallons of fuel, American forces were shipping millions of gallons monthly to North Africa. While Germans carefully maintained captured Sherman tanks, America was producing 1,350 monthly. While German soldiers treasured captured American rations, American production could feed armies and still destroy surplus to maintain prices. At Kasserine Pass, the Afrika Korps won a battle that proved the war was lost. They captured supplies that demonstrated they couldn't supply themselves. They achieved tactical victory that revealed strategic defeat was inevitable. They discovered that in modern industrial warfare, countries that could afford to abandon 57,000 gallons of fuel would inevitably defeat countries that couldn't afford to acquire it. The legacy of Kasserine Pass is thus profoundly different for victor and vanquished. For Americans, it was a harsh lesson that led to rapid improvement and eventual triumph. For Germans, it was a revelation that courage and skill meant nothing against industrial mathematics, that tactical excellence couldn't overcome strategic impossibility, that they were fighting not armies but arithmetic, and arithmetic always wins. In the end, those 57,000 gallons of captured American fuel told the entire story of World War II, not in battles won or lost, but in the industrial capacity to wage modern war. The Afrika Korps had captured proof of their own defeat, seized evidence of impossibility, and won a victory that proved victory was impossible. They had discovered, in abandoned American supply dumps in the Tunisian desert, the mathematical certainty of the Third Reich's destruction.